Welcome to AudioCert, where the official study guides are brought to life. And welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are really focusing our energy digging into Chapter 2 of the Certified Cloud Security Professional, or CCSP, curriculum. That's design requirements. Now, most people, they think cloud security, they think firewalls first, access control lists, that kind of thing. But, well, this chapter, it tells us pretty much the opposite.
It really does.
This is where we kind of stop talking about just the pure technology.
Right.
And start talking about why we build things the way we do.
That's absolutely right. Our mission today, it's all about setting that foundation. Before you deploy even one single virtual machine, before you pick out a security control, you absolutely have to understand those crucial non-technical inputs, what the business actually needs.
The requirement.
The requirements. Security decisions, whether they're in the cloud or, back on premise, they are fundamentally driven by the organization's value, its core processes, and critically, its acceptable level of risk.
So if you skip this part,
you're designing in a vacuum. It just won't work. Or worse, it'll cost way too much for what it protects.
Right. It's that essential context, the thing that dictates, well, proportionality. Like you said, without a proper assessment, you could be justifying, millions in spending to protect something that maybe only warrants thousands. Or maybe even worse.
You underprotect something that's absolutely mission critical.
Exactly. So over the next little while, we're going to analyze exactly how to figure out that true business impact. We'll try to clarify those, frankly, often confusing lines of responsibility, across infrastructure as a service, SaaS.
Yep,
platform as a service, PaaS.
PaaS.
And software as a service.
To dig three.
And then we'll review the foundational design principles that, help keep sensitive data safe when it's living in somebody else's environment.
Essentially, we're translating that subjective idea, risk appetite, into, objective, secure cloud architecture. Let's start with Section 1, Business Requirements Analysis. Basically, understanding what we protect.
Okay, so let's unpack this core idea. Security doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
We need specific, concrete info from the business side before we can handle risks properly.
Absolutely.
So what are those 4 pillars, the 4 key pieces of information we absolutely must have before any security design work even starts?
Yeah, these are really non-negotiable. They kind of hold up the entire security program. So first, we need a complete inventory of all assets, everything.
Inventory. Yeah,
Second, we need a defensible valuation of each asset. What's it worth?
Valuation makes sense.
Third, a clear determination of critical paths, processes, and assets. What absolutely cannot fail.
Criticality. Got it.
And finally, number 4, a formal understanding of the organization's risk appetite. How much risk are they willing to live with?
Risk appetite.
Okay.
Inventory, valuation, criticality, risk appetite. Every security decision comes back to these 4.
Every single one. They're the inputs for everything that follows.
All right, starting with the inventory then. Like you said, can't protect what we don't know we have. So how broad is this definition of asset in the CCSP world? Is it just, servers and software? Laptops?
Oh, it's much, much wider than that. An asset is basically anything owned or controlled by the organization that has value. And we usually group them into 3 big categories.
Okay.
First, the easy ones. Tangible assets. These are the physical things. IT hardware, servers, laptops, but also buildings, company vehicles, maybe retail inventory, stuff you can touch and count, relatively easy to audit.
Right, the stuff you can physically see and inventory. But, the real value often it lies in the stuff that's less visible, right? The unique bits of the business.
Precisely. That brings us to the second category. Intangible assets. This is often the real lifeblood. We're talking intellectual property or IP. Trade secrets, patents, maybe proprietary algorithms, customer lists, and critically important these days, the organization's brand reputation and public perception. Goodwill.
Yeah, a security breach that tanks the company's reputation. That could be way more expensive than replacing some server.
Way more. It can be existential sometimes. So tangible, intangible. And the third category, this one often gets missed in standard IT audits.
Okay, what's the third?
It's personnel, your people, their skills, their training, their knowledge, their productivity. These are enormous assets.
Yeah, personnel as assets.
Interesting.
Think about it. Losing a key, highly specialized developer or maybe an irreplaceable executive, that's a massive asset loss. It can stop projects cold, impact market perception.
Yeah, I can see that. So the goal of this whole initial inventory process using things like what? Surveys, interviews, maybe automated IT discovery tools, audits.
All of the above, whatever it takes.
The goal is essentially just to make sure we have this master list so nothing physical, conceptual, human gets left out, left unsecured. That's exactly it. If it's not on the inventory, you simply cannot secure it. It's invisible to the security program.
Okay, inventory done. But then we hit that next step you mentioned, valuation, which you said is harder. Why is putting a number, a measure of worth, on things so vital before we buy any security tools?
Well, it comes down to cost justification, yes. You mentioned the old saying.
The $10 lock on a $5 bike.
Exactly. But it's actually a bit more nuanced. We need to expend resources, time, money, effort, in proportion to the asset's loss value. What would it cost if this thing was gone or broken?
Ah, the loss value, not just the replacement cost.
Right. The goal is always to maximize the return on our security investment, our ROSI. If we assign some crazy high value to something, we risk wasting capital that the business could use elsewhere, maybe on R&D or marketing.
Or if we undervalue it.
Then the consequences during an incident, well, they could be fatal to the business. We didn't spend enough to protect it adequately.
Okay, so this valuation process, it's formalized, right? Through something called the Business Impact Analysis, the BIA.
Correct. The BIA.
How does the BIA go beyond just, like, sticking a simple dollar figure on an asset?
Well, the BIA is much more comprehensive. Yes, it helps determine the asset's worth, but maybe more importantly, it calculates the cost associated with its temporary loss or even its permanent loss.
Okay.
It looks at the cost of replacement or repair, and it also assesses, are there alternate ways we could operate if this thing goes down? It forces the business to really define operational metrics, and those directly inform the security design.
Can you give us some examples, those specific operational metrics that the BIA need to establish?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are critical because they underpin basically every decision made in business continuity or BC and disaster recovery, DR, planning.
Right, BCDR.
So we determine the maximum tolerable downtime, or MTD.
MTD, okay.
That's the absolute longest time a critical process can be offline before the organization suffers really unacceptable consequences, like going out of business type consequences.
That's the limit.
The absolute limit. Then, related to that, there's the recovery time objective, or RTO.
RTO.
This is the target time. The goal is set for resuming business processes after a disaster hits. And logically, the RTO must always be less than or equal to the MTD.
Okay, that makes sense. So if a process absolutely cannot be down for more than, say, 48 hours, that's the MPD,
Right.
then our IT team's goal, the RTO, to get it back up has to be maybe 36 hours or 24, something less than 48.
Precisely. You need that buffer. And the third key metric here is the recovery point objective, or RPO.
RPO, okay, what's that measure?
The RPO defines the acceptable amount of data loss, and it's usually measured in time. So if your RPO is, say, 4 hours,
Okay.
it means the business accepts losing the data generated in the last 4 hours during a recovery scenario, which in turn means you need backups or maybe replication running at least that frequently, every 4 hours or less.
Wow, okay.
Mhm.
MTD, RTO, RPO, I can definitely see how those numbers derived straight from the BIA would dictate everything, like how much redundancy you need in your cloud architecture, how often you back up.
Exactly. They drive concrete technical requirements.
Now, who actually does this? Who's tasked with assigning the value and figuring out the MTD, RTO, RPO? Is it the security team running the BIA?
No, generally not. The responsibility really falls squarely on the data owner.
The data owner. And who is that, usually?
Typically, it's the line of business manager, the person who's responsible for that data's collection, its accuracy, its use. They own the data in a business sense, so they assign the value, the classification level, and they help determine those critical MTD RPO number.
Okay, but this brings us back to something you hinted at earlier, a critical risk insight. If the data owner assigns the value, doesn't that introduce a potential bias?
It absolutely does, and it's a tension that security professionals, well, we have to manage carefully. Data owners, naturally, often have a strong tendency to overvalue their own assets.
Right. Everyone thinks their stuff is the most important.
Exactly. You can picture the head of marketing fighting for, maximum security Fort Knox level on their proprietary graphic design files. Meanwhile, the chief financial officer, the CFO, might see those files as, well, replaceable. Certainly not revenue generating compared to, say, the real-time customer transaction database.
So the security team's job isn't just to take the BIA results at face value.
No, not at all. our job is to help validate them against the organization's overall strategic goals and, crucially, against that risk appetite we talked about. We need to ensure there's proportionality across all the different departments.
It's kind of like normalizing the scores.
That's a great way to put it. We need to normalize those subjective departmental values against the objective, enterprise-wide perspective, and that perspective is usually set by senior management. This prevents us from, wildly overspending resources in one area while neglecting another.
Okay. So once we have that validated value, we move to the third pillar, criticality. What makes an asset just valuable versus truly critical? How do we draw that line?
Criticality, it denotes those aspects of the organization without which it simply could not operate, or maybe even exist. It's really a survival measure.
Survival.
And because deciding something is critical has such huge financial implications, you're basically saying spend whatever it takes. This determination must be made by senior management. They're the only ones who can really assess the impact across all business units.
Can you give us some more examples, tangible examples of criticality that go beyond just, say, a database?
Sure. Let's think about processes first. We mentioned the fast food restaurant needing working registers, payment systems.
Right.
If that process breaks, the company literally stops making money, stops operating. That's critical.
Okay. What about intangible?
Think about a pharmaceutical company. The actual data about a new drug compound, yeah, that's valuable. But the patent paperwork, the formal legal ownership document for that intellectual property, that's absolutely critical.
Because if the patent gets compromised,
their entire future revenue stream from that drug is jeopardized, maybe gone forever. That's critical.
Okay, I see. And data paths, you mentioned that earlier. How does criticality show up there?
Let's go back to that international shipping line example. Their core business, it depends on instantaneous, reliable logistical coordination. Data flowing from client orders to package tracking to finding available carriers.
Yeah, complex stuff.
Very. The data itself in each message is valuable, sure, but the continuous, accurate functioning of the path itself, the system that matches orders to carriers in real time, that path is critical. If it fails, billions in cargo could get stranded, misdirected, chaos.
Wow, okay. So determining criticality naturally leads us to thinking about and identifying single points of failure, SPOFs,
yeah,
right?
Exactly, SPOFs.
Define a SPOF for us, and maybe more importantly, why are they so dangerous if you find one inside a critical path?
Okay, so a SPOF, a single point of failure, it's any kind of choke point. It could be hardware, like one specific server. It could be software, one application instance. It could be a process step. Or even personnel, one specific person who knows how to do a critical task.
The key is single.
The key is single. The loss of that one single element halts the entire workflow that depends on it. Now, if a SPOF exists within a path or process that senior management has deemed critical. Uh-oh is right. It means a single, maybe localized failure. One server dies, one person gets sick, can cause the entire business process to exceed its maximum tolerable downtime, its MTD.
Which is, by definition, an unacceptable risk.
Completely unacceptable.
So how do organizations typically deal with these SPOFs once they're identified? What are the strategy?
Well, we deal with them primarily through mitigation, usually focused on building in resilience and redundancy. So for hardware SPOFs, we add redundancy, maybe failover systems, clustering, load balancers.
Right, more than one.
More than one. For process SPOFs, we try to build alternative methods for operating, maybe a manual workaround that can be spun up quickly if the automated system fails.
Okay.
For personnel SPOFs, the answer is usually cross-training, making sure multiple people can perform that critical role if the primary person is unavailable.
Spreading the knowledge.
Exactly. And for data or IT system SPOFs, we use robust load sharing or load balancing, and of course, consistent, frequently tested, restorable backups.
Now, thinking about this in a cloud context, the customer is generally kind of insulated from the provider's SPOFs, aren't they? I mean, that's part of the value proposition.
Mostly, yes, that's the idea. The cloud provider's whole business model relies on high availability, so we should expect and verify through audits and SLAs that they have engineered SPOFs out of their core architecture. Redundant power, redundant cooling, multiple network paths, resilient hardware.
Right.
However, the customer's SPOF concerns don't disappear, they just shift. They shift to the customer's own perimeter and their methods for accessing the cloud.
Oh, okay. Give me an example.
Okay, say the customer relies on just one single, maybe low bandwidth internet connection to access their critical application running in the provider's virtual private cloud, their VMC.
Right.
That single internet connection, that becomes a SPOF for the customer's use of the critical data. Even if the data center itself is, fully redundant with multiple power grids and everything, if the customer's pipe goes down, they can't reach their critical app.
It's like the last mile problem, but applied to the cloud connection.
Exactly. Your access method can become your critical SPOF.
Okay. We've assessed value, we've determined criticality, and found SPOFs.
Yeah.
Now, the final pillar from our initial 4, risk appetite. This sounds like the big one. The organizational principle guiding all the choices.
It really is. Risk appetite is the formally documented level, amount, or maybe type of risk the organization decides is acceptable in pursuit of its strategic goals.
And who sets this?
It has to be set at the highest level, senior management, maybe even the board of directors, because it's the ultimate benchmark against which every remaining risk, every residual risk gets measured.
Okay. Before we go further, maybe let's quickly review those fundamental truths about risk itself, the things the CCSP really emphasizes.
Good idea. So the first truth, risk is the likelihood that an impact will be realized. It's not just about the bad thing happening, the threat, but the probability of that threat actually exploiting a vulnerability and causing harm, the impact. Likelihood times impact.
Likelihood and impact.
Likelihood and impact. Got it.
Second fundamental truth.
Sure.
Risk can be reduced, but it can never be completely eliminated. There will always be some leftover risk, some residual risk. Perfection is impossible.
Okay, always some risk left.
Third, organizations must accept a certain level of risk, a calculated risk, just to operate successfully.
Yeah.
You can't eliminate all risk and still run a business.
Right, no risk, no reward sometimes.
Exactly. And this leads directly into the really critical legal and ethical caveat here.
Okay.
While an organization can legally decide to accept a higher financial or operational risk than its competitors, maybe they're more aggressive, more innovative.
Yeah.
They absolutely cannot, under any circumstances, accept risks related to health and human safety that fall below established industry standards or known best practices. Whoa, okay. Why is that health and human safety piece non-negotiable? Doesn't the organization still get to decide its own acceptable level there too?
Not when human life or well-being is potentially on the line. Accepting risk beyond the recognized industry standard of care in that area, that would almost certainly be viewed as gross negligence in a court of law.
Negligence.
It opens the organization up to immense legal liability, potentially even criminal charges in some cases. Think about a connected medical device, like an insulin pump or a pacemaker managed via the cloud.
Okay.
The manufacturer can maybe accept some financial risk if the device fails and needs replacement, but they absolutely cannot accept the risk of using, say, inadequate encryption that allows a hacker to remotely tamper with the device's function. That could harm or kill someone.
Right.
Due care, and frankly ethics, dictates they must adhere to the established safety and security standards for medical devices, regardless of the cost. There's no appetite for cutting corners on safety.
That distinction is crystal clear. Okay, so once we've identified a risk and we understand the appetite, we have those 4 classic strategies for treating the risk. Let's walk through them, maybe thinking about how they apply in a cloud context.
Sounds good. The 4 treatments. First is avoidance.
Avoidance.
This is basically deciding not to do something. Not pursuing a specific business opportunity, maybe not launching a service in a particularly high-risk region, because the identified risks, even after considering potential controls, still clearly exceed the organization's stated risk appetite. We just walk away.
Okay, just don't do it. Next is acceptance.
Acceptance. This means the analysis shows the risk actually falls within the organization's established appetite. So we formally acknowledge the risk, document it, and continue operations without needing extra effort or spending additional money on controls for that specific risk.
Can you give a cloud example?
Sure. Maybe accepting the very low residual risk of a localized power outage affecting our cloud application if the cloud provider contractually guarantees full redundancy across 2 completely separate geographic regions, each with independent power feeds. The risk is low enough, we accept it.
Okay. The third treatment strategy is transference.
Transference. This is where we pay a third party to shoulder the financial burden if the risk materializes. The classic example is insurance.
Right, buying insurance.
In the cloud world, we often see organizations transferring the financial risk associated with, say, a massive data breach through cyber insurance policies.
Okay.
But it's really crucial to remember what's being transferred here. We're usually only transferring the financial fallout, the cost of incident response, legal fees, fines, customer notification, and maybe some of the responsibility for managing the incident response itself.
But not the underlying legal liability for the data.
Exactly. We are not transferring the ultimate legal liability for protecting the data itself or the reputational damage. That, as we'll discuss more, almost always stays with the data owner, the cloud customer.
Okay, important distinction. And the fourth and final treatment, mitigation. This sounds like where security teams spend most of their time and budget.
It absolutely is. Mitigation involves actively applying specific controls, countermeasures, safeguards, whatever you want to call them, to decrease either the likelihood of the risk occurring or the impact if it does occur, or ideally both.
So if our BIA showed a high risk of sensitive data being exfiltrated,
we'd mitigate it, maybe with strong encryption for data at rest and in transit, implementing very strict access controls like zero trust principles, deploying data loss prevention or DLP, tools to monitor and block outbound data flows. We take concrete steps.
And even if we choose mitigation and we implement all these great controls, we're still left with something, right?
We are. We're left with the residual risk.
Residual risk, the leftover bit.
The leftover bit, and honestly, the ultimate strategic goal of the entire, often very expensive security program. It's actually quite simple on paper.
Okay.
It's to ensure that the residual risk, that leftover risk, after all our mitigation controls are in place and working, is low enough that it falls snugly and justifiably, defensibly, within the organization's senior management-defined risk appetite.
Get the residual risk below the appetite line.
And that's the key.
And as you mentioned way back at the beginning, the results of this whole BIA process, the asset lists, the valuations, the criticality calls, the MTDs, RPOs, RTOs, they don't just sit in a report. They all get recycled.
Constantly. They are the essential inputs that inform pretty much all subsequent security architecture decisions. They drive control selection, they shape vendor requirements, and they form the absolute foundation of our business continuity and disaster recovery plans. It all starts here.
Okay, transitioning now. We take all these established business requirements, value, criticality, risk appetite, and we have to apply them to the, well, let's be honest, often chaotic reality of cloud environments.
It gets messy.
Yeah. In the old days, the traditional world, we had a pretty clear physical perimeter, right? A firewall, a DMZ.
A nice bright line.
A bright line. Now, our data, it's living on hardware owned and operated by someone else. Those lines, the DMZ, the internal network, they get really blurry. You could almost say the perimeter has, well, dissolved.
It really has in many ways. And this creates some unique challenges. Before we even start talking about the specifics of IaaS, a CaaS, or SaaS, we absolutely must address the single most important legal distinction that the CCSP exam demands you understand. It's about ultimate liability.
Okay, lay it on us. What's the major aha moment here regarding ultimate legal liability in the cloud?
All right, here it is. It's the ultimate legal truth, you could say. The cloud customer is always ultimately legally liable for any loss or breach of their data.
Always, regardless of the cloud model, even if the provider messes up badly, like gross negligence.
Yes, always, regardless of the model, IaaS, PaaS, PaaS, and even if the cloud provider demonstrably fails in their duties, maybe through negligence or even in rare cases malice.
Wow. Okay, why? How can that be?
It's because the data is yours. You collected it, you own it, you're the custodian in the eyes of the law and the regulators. Most global privacy regulations, think GDPR in Europe, HIPAA for health data in the US, CCPA in California, many others that place the burden of compliance, including data breach notification and regulatory reporting, squarely on the organization that collected or owns the data. The data controller or data owner.
So let me get this straight. If a huge, reputable cloud provider has some catastrophic failure, maybe a massive hack due to their mistake, and my sensitive customer data gets breached, I can probably sue the provider for damages, right? For restitution.
You can, and likely would, sue them in civil court for financial damages.
Yeah.
Try to recover the costs you incurred because of their failure, incident response costs, legal fees, maybe lost business. But you, the cloud customer, are still the one who has the legal obligation to inform the relevant regulatory bodies, notify all the affected customers according to the specific laws, handle the public relations fallout, and potentially pay the regulatory fines, which can be enormous.
So outsourcing the operation doesn't outsource the legal responsibility.
That is the absolute key takeaway. You cannot outsource your legal responsibility as the data custodian. This is the fundamental, non-negotiable legal risk that every organization accepts, implicitly or explicitly, when they move data or workloads to the cloud.
Okay, that is heavy, but essential to understand. So with that heavy reality firmly established, let's look at how the operational responsibilities, the day-to-day security tasks, shift across those different cloud models. Starting with IaaS, infrastructure as a service. This is where the customer keeps the most control, right?
Correct. In IaaS, the provider handles the foundational physical stuff. The data center building, the power, cooling, the physical network gear, the actual server hardware, and usually the virtualization layer, the hypervisor that creates the VMs.
Okay, the base infrastructure.
Right. But the customer manages basically everything from the operating system, OS, upwards. OSN up. That means the customer is responsible for installing, configuring, patching, and securing the guest OS inside the virtual machine. They're responsible for all the applications running on that OS, all the data stored there, all the user administration, access controls, firewall rules on the VM, everything.
So quite a lot of responsibility still. But what specific security controls or maybe assurance mechanisms do customers actually lose, even in this high-control IaaS model compared to running it all in their own data center?
The biggest loss operationally is usually visibility. Control and visibility. Customers lose direct control over two critical areas, typically.
Okay, what are they?
First, they have to entrust the whole hardware acquisition process, the supply chain security, the physical security vetting of the servers themselves to the provider. You don't really know the exact provenance or history of the physical box your VM happens to be running on at any given moment.
Okay, loss of physical hardware control. What's the second?
Second, and this is often more critical for day-to-day security operations, the customer usually loses the ability to directly monitor the network traffic inside the provider's data center, the traffic flowing between your VMs, for instance.
Why is losing that internal network traffic monitoring, that east-west traffic visibility, such a potentially big security problem?
Because it significantly hinders your ability to detect lateral movement by attackers.
Lateral movement, okay.
Yeah, if an attacker manages to compromise just one of your virtual machines, maybe through a phishing attack or an unpatched vulnerability,
Right.
their next step is almost always to try and move laterally, to pivot from that initial beachhead to other VMs, databases, or sensitive resources within your cloud environment.
Looking for the crown jewels.
Exactly. In your own on-premise data center, you typically deploy network intrusion detection systems, IDS sensors, or taps at key internal network junctions to spot that kind of unusual east-west traffic pattern.
Right, you'd see VMA suddenly trying to scan VMB.
Precisely. In most IaaS environments, the provider owns and controls that internal network fabric. They often don't allow customers to deploy their own physical or virtual network sensors deep inside the provider's network. And they might not share all the granular proprietary traffic flow data needed for effective internal monitoring.
So that really hampers the customer's ability to do that kind of deep, continuous monitoring for advanced threats that might already be inside their cloud perimeter.
It absolutely does. It can create a significant blind spot. And this lack of internal network visibility can also become a huge compliance hurdle, especially if you're subject to regulations that mandate specific types of continuous security auditing or network monitoring.
So what do you do? How do you adapt?
It forces you to adapt your security strategy drastically sometimes. You might have to negotiate alternative controls with your auditors or regulators. Maybe you propose compensating controls, like deploying very rigorous host-based intrusion detection systems, HIDs, directly on every single VM.
Okay, monitoring on the endpoint itself.
Right. Coupled with really deep, centralized analysis of all the OS-level event logs from those VMs. Thankfully, in IaaS, since you control the OS, you do still control and retain those full OS event logs. That becomes absolutely critical beta.
Okay, so that's IaaS. Moving up the stack now to PaaS, platform as a service. The customer loses even more control here, right? Where does that security boundary line shift?
It shifts pretty dramatically upward in PaaS. Now, the cloud provider takes on the responsibility for installing, managing, patching, maintaining, and administering not just the hardware and hypervisor, but also the operating systems.
They handle the OS patching now.
They handle the OS patching, hardening, updates. And usually they also manage all the underlying middleware components needed for the platform environment. Things like the database instances, web server software, runtime environments like Java or .NET.
So the customer gets a ready-to-use platform.
Exactly. It offers massive efficiency gains, especially for development teams, because they get to offload all that tedious OS and middleware hygiene.
So what security responsibility is primarily left with the customer in a PaaS model then?
The customer is mainly left responsible for managing and securing their own applications that they build and deploy onto the platform. They need to manage the application configurations, secure their own code, protect the data they process within the application, and manage user access controls to the application itself.
So monitoring application-level events, making sure their code doesn't have vulnerabilities like SQL injection.
Precisely. Their focus shifts entirely to the application layer and the data within it. This model is super popular for development and deployment environments for that reason. Focus on code and data, not the underlying infrastructure plumbing.
Okay. And finally, the third major model, SaaS, Software as a Service. This represents the absolute minimum customer responsibility, correct?
That's right. In SaaS, the customer basically just supplies and processes their data using the software provided. That's pretty much it.
Like using webmail or a CRM system online.
Exactly. The provider owns and operates everything else: the hardware, the network, the OS, the middleware, the application software itself, all the updates, all the administration. The customer effectively becomes just a common user of the application. They usually have very few, if any, administrative rights or deep system configuration responsibilities.
So this leads us back to what you call the ultimate paradox of cloud security earlier, doesn't it?
It really does. Think about it. The customer, operating in a typical SaaS environment, has the least amount of direct control over the security architecture, the system maintenance, the patching schedules, the underlying policy implementation.
Yeah, almost none.
Yet, as we established earlier, they remain 100% legally liable for the protection and confidentiality of their data being processed by that SaaS application.
Wow. So your entire security strategy in SaaS hinges almost completely on what? Due diligence, contract.
Almost entirely. It hinges on your ability to perform incredibly rigorous due diligence before signing up, really vetting the provider's security practices, their certifications, their audit reports, and then locking down responsibilities and expectations through strong contractual liability clauses and detailed service level agreements, or SLAs. The contract becomes your primary security control in SaaS.
Okay. Now, speaking of loss of control, you mentioned one massive foundational control loss that applies across the board, regardless of the model, IaaS, PaaS, or SaaS.
Yes, that is the universal loss of physical access.
Physical access.
In every single cloud model, without exception, the customer gives up the ability to physically walk up to, touch, inspect, or directly control the actual physical devices that are storing and processing their data.
You can't put your own padlock on the server rack.
You can't. And this is, undeniably, a significant increase in risk and a fundamental reduction in assurance compared to an on-premise model. Why? Because physical access is often cited historically as the ultimate key. If you can physically access the hardware, you can eventually access the data, one way or another.
So since we can't eliminate this physical access risk when using the cloud, we have to mitigate it, right? To demonstrate what the lawyers call due care.
Exactly. We must mitigate it to show we've taken reasonable steps.
So what specific controls should customers be demanding contractually from their cloud provider to help mitigate the risks that come with losing that physical access?
We need to demand and critically verify evidence of several key categories of controls from the provider. First, the provider absolutely must perform strict background checks on all their personnel who have physical access to the data center facilities, and ideally have continuous monitoring or oversight for those roles.
Okay, vet the people.
Vet the people rigorously. Second, they must demonstrate and maintain extreme physical security measures at the data center itself.
Right.
We're talking multi-factor authentication to get in, maybe biometric scanners, man-trap doors, 24/7 surveillance, strict visitor logging, secure zones within the facility.
Well, the works.
Layers of physical defense.
Layers upon layers. Third, and this is arguably the most powerful technical control the customer can influence, is ensuring the robust use of encryption.
Yeah.
Specifically, encryption for data at rest on the provider's storage, and potentially encryption for data while it's being processed, though that's harder. The goal is designing it so that even if the physical storage media were somehow stolen or improperly accessed,
the data would be useless.
Useless cryptographic gibberish without the encryption keys, which ideally the customer manages or controls access to.
Okay. Vet the people, secure the facility, encrypt the data. And you mentioned earlier that the specifics, like how often we get audit reports, what kind of logs they share, our right to audit them directly. These aren't uniform industry standards. Yeah. Not at all. They vary wildly between providers and service tiers, which means it all comes back down to one critical document.
The contract.
The contract. All those specific rights and responsibilities, including things like indemnification if they are grossly negligent, how security incidents involving your data will be reported, your audit rights. All of that is subject to sometimes intense negotiation. And it absolutely must be codified clearly and unambiguously in the final service contract and SLAs. A good cloud security design, honestly, begins not with configuring a firewall rule, but with negotiating a strong, detailed contract.
All right, we've nailed down the business needs, we've assessed criticality, we've clarified those often messy boundaries of responsibility in the cloud models. Now we get to move into the actual architectural design principles, the things we must apply to keep sensitive data safe in this shared, sometimes high-risk, third-party environment. Let's start with a really foundational practice, device hardening.
Okay, hardening. The core conceptual approach here, the mindset shift you need, is to basically assume constant exposure. In traditional IT, we often had this sort of crunchy outside, chewy inside model. We treated our internal network as relatively trustworthy, and the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, as untrustworthy and exposed.
Right, harden the perimeter.
Harden the perimeter, yeah. In the cloud, it is considered a crucial best practice to treat all resources, even things running inside what feels like a protected internal space, like a virtual private cloud or VPC. Treat them all as if they are sitting directly in the DMZ.
Everything. Even my back-end database microservice that's supposed to be in a private subnet with no direct internet access, treat it like it's on the public internet.
Yes. Harden it accordingly. Why?
Yeah, why?
Because of that principle we mentioned earlier. Attacker pivot or lateral movement. Assume breach. Assume an attacker will eventually gain access to at least one, maybe less critical component inside your cloud environment. Perhaps a weakly configured administrative jump box or a developer's compromised workstation that has VPN access.
Okay, they get a foothold somewhere.
They get a foothold. From that foothold, they will attempt to pivot to move laterally to reach other resources. If your backend database microservice isn't properly hardened, if it's running unnecessary services, has default passwords, isn't patched,
then that initial, maybe minor breach becomes an instant catastrophe.
Instantly. They jump right to the crown jewels. Hardening everything helps to limit the damage an attacker can do after they inevitably get inside your cloud perimeter somehow. It contains the blast radius.
Okay, assume everything is hostile territory. Got it. So let's look at some hardening checklists. Maybe first, from the cloud provider side. What are their key hardening responsibilities? Focusing on ensuring high assurance in their physical data center and the hypervisor layer they manage.
The provider's hardening checklist, it really emphasizes reducing the attack surface of their infrastructure and ensuring the integrity of their control plane. This means things like all unused physical ports on servers and network gear must be disabled and ideally monitored. All default configurations, default usernames, default passwords, absolutely eliminated. Strong, unique credentials everywhere.
Basic hygiene, but critical at scale.
Absolutely. Hypervisors, the software creating the VMs, must be kept consistently patched and updated against known vulnerabilities. Any shared management interfaces, the consoles they use to administer the cloud fabric, must be rigorously secured, usually with multi-factor authentication, MFA, and all administrative actions must be heavily logged and audited.
And what about keeping customers separate?
Crucially important. They must employ strong, logical separation mechanisms, things like VLANs, security groups, hypervisor isolation techniques to ensure that one customer's virtual machines or network traffic cannot possibly interfere with or access another customer's resources running on the same physical hardware. That tenant isolation is fundamental.
Okay, that's the provider's baseline hardening. Now, what about the customer's hardening checklist, especially focusing on those remote assets that are accessing the cloud data laptops, maybe mobile devices, often in a bring-your-own-device or BYOD environment? That seems like a huge risk area.
It is. The endpoint, the user's device, essentially becomes the new perimeter in many cloud scenarios. So the customer must secure that endpoint rigorously. The checklist here includes things like every device accessing corporate cloud resources must have robust, up-to-date anti-malware and security software installed, and ideally, it should be centrally managed and configured to report its status back to the organization.
Endpoint protection. Okay.
We absolutely require the use of local encryption on the devices stored, full disk encryption usually,
Right.
to protect the data stored on the device itself if it's lost or stolen.
Makes sense.
Access to the device must be secured with strong multi-factor controls, not just a simple password. Often mixing something password, with something you are biometric like fingerprint or Face ID, or something you have, a physical token or authenticator app.
MFA on the endpoint. Got it.
And how do we deal with that really high risk of device loss or theft, especially with personally owned BYOD devices? That's always a nightmare scenario.
That is.
It is. And that's where the legal preparation has to meet the technical control. Technically, we need the capability for remote wipe and remote lock of the device.
Okay, so IT can brick it or erase it if it's lost.
Right. But because it's often a personally owned device in DYOD scenarios, the organization absolutely must get the user's explicit, written, informed consent to allow that remote wipe lock capability before they're allowed to access corporate data. This is usually done via a clearly worded, signed, authorized use policy, or AUP. You can't just wipe someone's personal phone without their prior agreement.
Ah, the legal consent piece is key for BYOD wipe.
Okay.
What else for remote access?
We also required the proper employment of strong, secure VPN solutions for essentially all access to sensitive cloud resources. No direct connections over the public internet if possible. And increasingly, we see the mandatory installation of a data loss or leak prevention DLP agent on the endpoint.
DLP on the endpoint. What does that do?
The DLP agent monitors how sensitive data, identified by patterns or keywords, is being used on the device, and can track or even block attempts to copy it to unauthorized locations, like personal USB drives, cloud storage, or webmail. It helps prevent accidental or intentional data leakage from the endpoint.
Okay, that's quite a list for endpoint hardening.
Yeah.
You also mentioned containerization software as an option for BYOD earlier. That sounded potentially very effective.
It can be extremely useful, yeah. Containerization software, sometimes called workspace management software, basically creates a secure, encrypted, isolated partition or container on the user's personally owned device.
Like a sandbox.
Exactly like a sandbox. All the organizational data, the corporate apps, the secure email client, they all live and run inside this encrypted container, completely separate from the user's personal apps, photos, games, whatever.
Ah, so it isolates the corporate world from the personal world on the same device.
Precisely. This hugely mitigates the risk of sensitive corporate data accidentally mingling with insecure personal applications or getting backed up to personal cloud accounts. And it provides a much cleaner, more targeted option for that remote wipe capability we talked about.
How so?
If the device is lost or the employee leaves, IT can just remotely wipe the container, removing all corporate data and access without touching the user's personal stuff, their family photos, contacts, etc. It makes the whole BYOD proposition much more palatable for both the user and the organization.
Yeah, that sounds like a much better approach. And we also need to remember, with virtualization being so central to cloud, we're not just hardening physical boxes anymore.
Yeah.
We're hardening digital files too, right?
Exactly. Virtual instances, VMs, they need to be protected in two states. Both while they are active and running, ensuring the data being processed inside them is properly isolated and secured according to policy. And also while they are stored as files.
Stored as files, like backups or snapshots.
Right. Think about VM snapshots, templates, or full virtual disk image files, like VMDKs or VHDs. These files are often highly portable, easily copied, and they contain a complete image of the operating system, applications, configurations, and potentially sensitive data. So those stored VM image files must be treated as highly sensitive assets themselves. They need to be hardened, access controlled, and ideally encrypted just as rigidly as if they were physical machines.
Okay. Hardening everything, physical and virtual, active and stored. Got it. Next big design principle, encryption. You mentioned it as a key mitigation for losing physical control. Where are the two main locations or states where we absolutely must deploy encryption in a cloud environment?
Broadly speaking, we think about encryption in two primary locations or states. Location one is in the cloud data center, protecting data when it's not actively moving. We call this data at rest.
Data at rest, okay.
Here, we absolutely use encryption for things like long-term storage, archives, backups, essential. We also use it, as we just discussed, to protect those near-term stored files, like the snapshots or templates of virtualized instances.
Makes sense. Any other uses for encryption at rest within the data center?
Yeah, a really powerful security technique is using encryption within a system to prevent even authorized personnel from accessing specific data sets they don't need to see. For instance, encrypting specific sensitive fields within a database, like credit card numbers or social security numbers.
Ah, so even the database administrator.
Right. The DBA can still manage the database software, perform backups, optimize queries, do their job, but they cannot view the actual clear text values in those specially encrypted fields because they don't have the specific decryption key for that data. It enforces separation of duties even among privileged users.
That's clever. And this ties into secure data disposal too, right? Crypto shredding.
Exactly. Secure sanitization through cryptographic erasure or crypto shredding. The idea is simple but powerful. If your data at rest is strongly encrypted using a unique key, then when you want to securely destroy that data, instead of needing to physically shred the hard drives or perform multiple overwrite passes, which can be difficult to verify in a cloud environment where you don't control the hardware,
you just destroy the key.
You just securely destroy or discard the encryption key associated with that data. Once the key is gone, the underlying encrypted data, even if it physically remains on the provider's disks for a while, is rendered permanently and irrecoverably inaccessible. It's just random-looking bits. It's a very efficient way to achieve secure data disposal in the cloud.
Okay, so that's location 1, data center, data at rest. What's location 2 for encryption?
Location 2 is communications. Protecting data while it's moving between systems. We call this data in transit.
Data in transit.
Here, encryption is absolutely essential for creating secure communication sessions. It ensures both the confidentiality, preventing eavesdropping, and the integrity, preventing tampering of data as it travels across networks, whether that's between the end user and the cloud application, between different microservices within the cloud, or between the customer's on-premise environment and the cloud.
And what technologies do we rely on here?
We heavily rely on well-established cryptographic protocols like TLS, Transport Layer Security, the successor to SSL, which secures web traffic, HTTPS, and also strong VPN, a virtual private network, tunnels, often using protocols like IPsec or OpenVPN to create secure encrypted connections over potentially untrusted networks like the internet.
Okay. Data at rest, data in transit. Now let's talk about that more challenging, maybe forward-looking concept you touched on, homomorphic encryption. You said it's still largely experimental, but why is understanding the idea behind it so important for the CCSP? What problem is it trying to solve?
It's vital to understand because it aims to address the single biggest remaining vulnerability or gap in the traditional encryption lifecycle: protecting data while it is actively in use or being processed.
Data in use, what do you mean?
Right now, think about it. For a computer to actually perform computations on data, to sort it, search through it, run statistical analysis on it, whatever it generally needs to have that data temporarily decrypted into clear text, right there in the computer's memory, its RAM.
Yeah, it has to see the numbers to add them up.
Exactly. And that brief moment when the data is sitting in memory in clear text while being processed, that's a potential moment of vulnerability. It could potentially be accessed by sophisticated malware running on the system, or maybe even by a compromised cloud administrator who has deep system access.
So even if it's encrypted at rest and encrypted in transit, it's potentially exposed during that processing phase.
That's the gap. And homomorphic encryption is the name for a specialized, mathematically complex type of encryption technology that is designed to allow certain types of computations, like addition, multiplication, searching, to be performed directly on the data while it remains encrypted.
Wait, you can do math on encrypted data without decrypting it first. How does that even work?
It involves some very advanced cryptographic techniques, lattice-based cryptography usually. The details are incredibly complex, but the outcome is that the result of the computation performed on the encrypted data is also encrypted. And only the user who holds the original private key can decrypt that final result to view the clear text output.
Wow. So the cloud provider, or anyone snooping on the server's memory, would only ever see encrypted gibberish, even while the data is being actively worked on.
That's the holy grail, yes. If homomorphic encryption becomes practical and efficient enough for widespread use, and it's still facing significant performance challenges today, it would fundamentally change the cloud security threat model. It could potentially eliminate almost entirely the risk of cloud infrastructure providers or malware on their systems ever seeing sensitive customer data in the clear while it's being actively processed.
That would be a massive game changer. Ensuring the data truly never needs to be exposed to the underlying infrastructure layer. Very cool concept. Okay, moving on from encryption, let's look at another crucial design principle: using layered defenses. often called defense in depth. This isn't just about, putting a firewall in front of a web server, is it? It's broader than that.
Oh, much broader. It's really a holistic security philosophy, not just a single tactic. Defense in depth is the strategic practice of utilizing multiple different overlapping security mechanisms, and critically, using a blend of different types of controls.
Types of controls.
Yeah, we usually categorize controls into 4 main types. Administrative controls, like policies, procedures, training. Logical or technical controls, like firewalls, encryption, access control systems. And physical controls, like locks, guards, fences. Defense in depth means using layers incorporating controls from all these categories.
And the core idea is redundancy if one layer fails.
Exactly. The core principle is that if one security control fails or is bypassed by an attacker, there should be another different type of control standing ready behind it to detect or impede the attacker's progress. No single control failure should lead to a total compromise.
Makes sense. Let's try to break that down. How would defense in depth look from the cloud provider's perspective first? Since they control the physical facility and the base infrastructure, what layers would they typically implement?
The provider absolutely implements layers across all 4 categories. For personnel controls, which are administrative, they'd have those strong background checks we talked about, maybe required security certifications for key staff, security awareness training, and continuous monitoring or auditing of employee activities, especially privileged users.
Okay, controlling the people.
For technological or logical controls, they'd be using things like robust encryption for their internal management traffic, detailed event logging on all infrastructure components, strong access control enforcement on the hypervisors and management plane, network segmentation.
Technical safeguards.
Right. Then physical controls are huge for them. That's the multi-layered security over the entire campus, then the specific building access, then access into the data center floor area, maybe cage-level access controls for different customer zones, controls over physical racks, and strict procedures for controlling and destroying portable media like hard drives, layer upon layer of physical security.
Okay. And the 4th type, governance.
Right, governance controls, which often blend administrative and logical aspects. This involves having strong, well-documented security policies and procedures, ensuring mandatory compliance with relevant regulations and standards, like ISO 27001 or SOC 2, and conducting regular, often unannounced, internal and third-party audits to verify that all the other controls are actually working effectively.
Okay, so the provider builds a deep stack of controls. Now, from the customer's perspective, using the cloud, how do we contribute to that layered defense? Especially thinking about those non-technical control types. We don't control the physical building after all.
True, but we still build our own layers on top of and interacting with the provider's layers. For administrative controls, a huge one for the customer is implementing mandatory security awareness training programs for all their own staff who will be using the cloud services, teaching them about phishing, secure password practices, data handling policies.
Human firewall layer.
Exactly. For logical or governance controls, customers use that negotiated contract as a security tool, contractually enforcing specific security requirements or reporting from the provider. They also implement their own strong access control policies for their users accessing cloud resources. Who gets access to what data under what conditions?
Policy and contracts as controls.
Okay. Then for technical controls, the customer implements things like mandatory use of endpoint encryption and security software on their user devices, as we discussed under hardening. Maybe using logical isolation mechanisms like containerization on BYOD assets, and critically, requiring strong multi-factor authentication MFA methods for all remote access into the cloud environment.
Adding our own technical layers.
Precisely. By layering our administrative, governance, and technical controls on top of the provider's foundational layers, we achieve a much more robust overall security posture. Defense in depth is a shared responsibility, too.
Okay. As we kind of wrap up this segment on core design principles, we probably shouldn't forget maybe the easiest principle of all. Don't reinvent the wheel. Leverage existing guidance, all right?
That is absolutely essential. Security is complex enough without trying to invent everything from scratch. There's no need to reinvent fundamental security methodologies or control frameworks. Rely on established, widely accepted, peer-reviewed models and guidance.
So what are some of the key references or frameworks that someone studying for the CCSP should be aware of? The ones that really inform good cloud security design?
There are several really important ones. The Cloud Security Alliance, or CSA, publishes the Cloud Controls Matrix. CCM. That's a hugely valuable resource. It maps specific cloud security controls across various frameworks and regulations. Very practical.
Okay, CSA, CCM. What else?
The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, in the U.S., offers a wealth of guidance. Particularly relevant is their Risk Management Framework, RMF, outlined in Special Publication 800-937. It provides a comprehensive life cycle approach to managing security and privacy risk.
NIST SP 837.
Got it. And another widely respected framework, especially for IT governance and management aspects, is ISCA's COBIT framework. It helps align IT strategy, including security, with overall business goals.
COBIT. Okay, so CSA, CCM, NIST RMF 837, and COBIT. Good starting points for established best practices.
Definitely. Leveraging these existing frameworks saves time, ensures you're covering expected bases, and gives you a defensible foundation for your security design choices. Hashtag recap and outro.
All right, that brings us to the end of a really comprehensive deep dive into Chapter 2, focusing on the crucial business requirements and design principles for secure cloud architecture. Let's take a moment just to quickly recap the absolute critical takeaways that you should really try to lock in from this discussion.
Yeah, let's summarize. First and foremost, we established that absolute necessary foundation. Security design must start with understanding the business requirements.
Not with technology.
Not with technology first. That meant understanding how to conduct a thorough business impact analysis, or BIA, to determine the asset inventory, assign realistic valuations, and identify critical processes and data.
And defining those key metrics.
Exactly. Defining MTD, maximum tolerable downtime, RPO, recovery point objective, and RTO, recovery time objective. And then understanding the organization's risk appetite, ensuring that our final residual risk after controls falls within that acceptable level.
Okay, business foundation first. Then we moved into the cloud service models.
Right. We clarified those shifting boundaries of responsibility and the, frankly, extreme variations in operational control across IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS.
Yeah, remembering in IaaS, the customer manages the OS and everything above it, but often loses that critical internal network visibility.
In PaaS, the provider takes over managing the OS and middleware, leaving the customer to focus on the application and data security.
And in SaaS, the customer is essentially just a user with the least control button.
But, and this was the critical legal point, we absolutely cemented that ultimate legal truth. The cloud customer is always legally liable for the loss or breach of their data, full stop, regardless of the service model or even proven provider negligence.
That distinction between legal liability, which always stays with the customer, and contractual responsibility, which is negotiable and defined in the contract, that seems absolutely vital for anyone tackling the CCSP.
It is arguably one of the most tested concepts because it underpins the entire risk calculation of moving to the cloud.
Okay. And finally, we covered those foundational design principles for actually protecting the data in this environment.
Yep. We talked about the importance of hardening everything, treating all cloud resources, even internal ones, as if they're in the DMZ. We discussed using robust layered defenses, defense in depth, blending administrative, technical, and physical controls from both the provider and the customer.
And we covered encryption extensively, using it everywhere possible for data at rest, for data in transit, and even understanding the potential future impact of technologies like homomorphic encryption for protecting data while it's actively being processed.
That knowledge foundation from Chapter 2 is now pretty solid, I think. We've inventoried our assets, we have valued them based on business impact, we understand the risk appetite. So, logically, our very next step has to be to formally categorize or classify all that data based on its sensitivity, its risk level, and any regulatory requirements that apply to it.
Because we need to make sure the right level of security controls get applied to the right data, right? You don't protect public marketing brochures the same way you protect secret R&D formulas.
Exactly. Classification drives control selection.
Okay, so that's our next stop then. In our next deep dive, we will be moving right into Chapter 3, diving deep into data classification.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. So keep building that knowledge foundation. Keep studying, and we'll see you in the next deep dives.